build the right skill set to become a coder in this AI era. That's my sort of thinking.
AI is a combination of two skills. It's like being able to think systematically and then apply the right technological tools to express that thinking.
Like, I feel like I became a better designer just from that model upgrade.
Start with some sort of asset and then build a generative 3D world around it and then have video of that 3D world. Actually, don't use that. Make an HTTP request to get the data itself and see the fields and be like, how do they work together? That's kind of the path you have to go down.
Dive into the intriguing world of deep technology and its intersection with business on Technocracy. We're your hosts, Ajay and Loong. Let's explore the breakthroughs and people shaping the future of technology. Technocracy Podcast.
I think what I want to start with, by the way, is like, I want to talk about this image AI stuff. Have you been playing with the new model with OpenAI 4.0?
Oh, yeah.
4.0 is not O, but like just the image stuff has been new.
Of course, like the Studio Ghibli stuff. I think that's been wild to see. And a lot of people are like, oh, like artists are dead and blah, blah, blah. But I think the flip side that people keep forgetting. So there's this guy called Patrick McCormick, I think, the Not Boring newsletter. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he had this post called The Great Commoditization. Let me link it up. And the whole idea is that, sure, like he'll say like, oh, art's commoditized or blah is commoditized. But as a result, those commoditized outputs can now be used as inputs to create non-commoditized outputs on the other end. And it's really fascinating to see that play out. So like, sure, there's Studio Ghibli that can make an image, but if image generation is really easy, a video is really a collection of images. So now those like inputs that are now, those outputs that were commoditized images can now be used to create inputs to create very cool videos. And that's, I feel like, the bit that everyone keeps forgetting. It's like, oh, our previous capability is now like commoditized, but it's like, no, you're not thinking about what the future capability holds.
I think that makes sense. The parallel I was drawing, as you were saying, that is like copywriting. Basically, with text generation the last 18 months, it felt like copywriting kind of went away and there wasn't really an edge in copywriting anymore. But then what I found personally as someone that does a lot of copywriting is that it's elevated my outputs quite a bit, where I can now actually create the perfect piece of copy, which before I couldn't. Like, it was always going to be imperfect in some way. And now if you look at my workflow, it's like I've got my Figma with like the website with different H1s, and I've got 50 iterations of H1s I'm going through. The AI is helping me with ideas, but I'm also like fiddling around with it, trying to get it exactly right. And I just noticed my quality of output is like 100 times better. And then when I show people as well, there's like a couple of marketing drops I'm about to do. Mm-hmm. The amount of jokes I wrote for this like one particular line, it was like 100 different variations of this joke, just trying to get it perfect. And then like when I shared it with people, the difference was like night and day between the first iteration and the 100th iteration. So there is this new era of like effort and taste and like very high quality, which I'm actually very excited for. But if you're very mediocre, you're going to be scared. That's what I've been thinking about.
Well, I can't remember who said it, but it comes down to that thing where it's like, you're not going to get replaced by AI. You're going to get replaced by someone who's using AI if you're not. But I also think the reason why people, like, I totally agree. And I think the reason why people don't pay attention to like the new kinds of outputs that we'll be able to generate is because they're like going to be categorically new. Yeah. Like the immediate counterpoint to your example was, okay, well, we have video generating AIs and they're coming, right? They may not be here yet, but they're going to be here in the next few years. And I think that's a no-brainer. But it's hard to give examples. And as someone who might be scared of the field, it's hard to think of examples because kind of by definition, they don't exist yet, right? And it's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, content creators weren't really a thing, right? But it would have been very hard to have predicted that that would have been like a major thing. You probably could have come up with it. If you just come up with a list of 20, it would have been in there. But knowing whether or not it was going to actually happen and whether people were going to make entire careers out of it would have been like, I don't think anyone knew that was coming. Because in some sense, that's what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? And 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs fail. So 9 out of 10 of the things you think might become a thing in the future probably won't. And 9 out of the 10 of the ones that do would be actually very hard to think of.
100%. The bit that I'm very excited about, like it's on my to-do list, is so the other type of output that's now going to be enabled by this technology is the generation of 3D assets and like worlds inside those assets. So you can actually hook up Claude to Spline or like or Blender via MCP and then generate new worlds and then have videos of that generated world, like it gets very meta very quickly. And so that's something that I've like has been on my to-do list, is to start start with some sort of asset and then build a generative 3D world around it and then have video of that 3D world being showcased for some sort of like marketing collateral or asset that I'm keen to make. Oh, you're muted, AJ.
I didn't realize there were MCPs for Spline and Blender. That's wild. Actually 2 days ago, I realized that I'm just so behind, even though I'm actually ahead in like some weird way, like probably ahead of 99% of people, but I feel behind with the 0.99%. And so I actually hired an AI tutor. So I officially start my first class next week. It's someone you know, Loong, by the way. So I'll tell you later. But
okay, you don't want to tell me now? We just bleep their name.
It's well, I want to see if it's good first before I commit.
I'll pre-tell you. I'll tell you beforehand if he's good.
Well, I've got the trial lesson. I'll send it later. But yeah, I'm doing an hour a week with him, and he's basically going to teach me how to become a better vibe coder and chaos coder, and like just actually build the right skill set to become a coder in this AI era. That's my sort of thinking at the moment, because I just feel so behind, and I want someone to just compile it all and give it to me.
I've got a hot take on that. It's everyone's like, I want to learn AI. I think that's the wrong question people are asking. It's really, AI is a combination of two skills. It's like being able to think systematically and then apply the right technological tools to express that thinking. And I feel like a lot of people like who are trying to learn AI, it's like that's the bit that like kind of gets you, right? Like becoming a better vibe coder, right? You break that down. It's like, okay, it's really engineering, but then what is engineering? And then it's like, you start asking these questions and it always comes down to these two decision trees. So I think in the past, like where strong thinkers were kind of relegated to the realms of writing and like showcasing their thoughts, the best thinkers can now actually express that because the execution layer kind of gets commoditized.
Yeah, it makes sense. I say AI tutor, but that's more clickbait. I think he's basically just going to be my coding / like engineering tutor, really, and being able to apply some of this stuff. Like MCP, I tried to set it up myself and figure out what was going on, and I just found it too hard. So I just like literally want him to sit there and be like, cool, like, this is how you set it up. This is how you can use it. And so I think that would be useful. I want to touch upon your personal software stack, but just before that, I just want to show you like, so yesterday when this like image stuff came out, I feel like I became a better designer just from that model upgrade. So this is something I made for like a dinner I'm hosting, which is tonight, but you know, it's fine. The design's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but this is what I worked on using the existing AI I had, getting inspiration from it and working on it. And then yesterday I was like, oh, I don't really like it. Let me like workshop with the AI how to make it better. And this is what I ended up getting. So like a way better logo. I really like the logo better. It helped me figure out the right placement of things. I didn't like it exactly how it was, but then in Canva, I could recreate something a little bit better. And then the cool thing is I could turn everyone into these like, you know, Argonauts and like put that in. Cool. And it's just like such a cool thing I can give to everyone that comes to dinner. So anyway, I feel like I became a better designer yesterday, which is awesome.
No, that's really cool. I love that. You see, it's like that little thought of like getting everyone's photo and then applying a little stylistic thing to it. It's there's no amount of money that can really buy you that. You can't tell the AI like, hey, make this amazing. But it's that thought that like suddenly like elevates that piece of work so much better.
100%. I think I suddenly became maybe a 3 out of 10 designer into a 7 out of 10 designer or an 8 out of 10 designer, right? Which is awesome. So I'm like super stoked with this like upgrades I'm getting with this AI.
100%. It's one thing I actually did today was run Olama Mistral. Having a local LLM model is really fun. Just seeing it kind of like gallop away. And it takes 3 commands to spin up. It was a lot easier than I thought it would be.
Why have a local model?
So I guess this is the transition in. But basically, so yeah, I mean, do you want me to? Yeah, effectively, my whole thesis is that every human will have a personal data warehouse in the future. And this personal data warehouse will be kind of everything you've ever done. And the reason why I was exploring these local LLMs is that I'm trying to build a local stack. I mean, it's still in the cloud, but you can run it on-prem if you really want. But if you have a database on your premise effectively, then you have your own local LM. You can now process large swaths of your personal data very efficiently and basically have kind of like this AI that has complete context about you, always learning about what you do and how you operate effectively. So yeah, that's been some of the stuff that I've kind of been like playing around with.
So the reason I asked Kerman on board was like, I was telling him about all the zaps I've made and all these cute little things, and he's like listening very patiently and like, being really kind. And then he's like, oh yeah, like this is what I have. And then he shows me a Superbase account and just like all the data he's ingesting and like how he's passing it through AI and then like putting it into this like system for his own chat essentially. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm clearly just doing this at like a 2 out of 10 and you're doing it at 11. And so as you've clearly seen from this podcast, like I want to get to a 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 for everything. That's my goal. And so do you want to quickly talk about, I guess, like what you've set up and what data you've started collecting and starting to use?
Yeah, I think for me, the big realization I've seen over the past like few years now, not even months, is everyone loves AI, but everyone hates the word data engineering. It's and if you kind of are now seeing that the models are very interchangeable and commoditized themselves, reasoning models are really just kind of your base model with like a few extra configurations and like the way they're set up. So if you take the premise that the models aren't really that valuable by themselves, it's the data that matters. The more important question is, well, how do you get the right data to these models? And as soon as you ask that question, it's this really monotonous world of data engineering where, okay, well, where does the data live? What are my options to pull that data out? How often can I pull it out? What format is it in? How do the formats change? How do I store them? Like those few questions themselves are actually really hard to do. And one thing that AI is absolutely terrible with, and I highly do not recommend you use it for, is data engineering. It will absolutely crumble when you try to do any sort of data engineering work with it.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because when you look at the output of a data structure, it is unique to that particular use case and context. And it's not obvious as to why certain decisions are made. So the AI is going to pattern match to what it's seen in its training data set. And it will hallucinate, it will make incorrect assumptions, and all of these other sorts of things. Because when you're understanding an API, you're kind of understanding this external system from first principles. A very simple example is like, okay, we have some amount of data in place A, and we need to pull it into place B. Now, the first time we get the data, we can say, hey, give me all the data you have. And maybe you go through it one by one. Now, okay, what are your rate limits? First question. And then when will you exhaust those rate limits? That's kind of like the very basic stuff. But then once you have everything, what happens when you go again to the server and you say, hey, I only want to find what's changed? Maybe they give a way for you to do that natively. Maybe you have to piece together the bits of the puzzle yourself. Maybe the API response changes based on some arbitrary condition that they've implemented on their end. So all these things start to create more challenges in essence. And it's really boring stuff. Like it's not the sexy AI image gen stuff that everyone loves to showcase. It's kind of like sitting down, banging your head against the wall and be like, why is this field not showing up in this way?
That makes sense. I think I've only seen this from like when you force AI to be like, can you give me a JSON in this particular like output, and sometimes it breaks. Do you think this will be solved with time as some of these reasoning models get better as well?
I'm pretty bearish that AI will magically be able to do data engineering. What you can do is though set up meta systems for it to work. So like having schemas in code, overlooking like how it's kind of generating these things, being very particular. But then you need meta infrastructure around like as you're doing data engineering work. So that's kind of the challenge. And the other bit we're going to start running into is that because everyone knows the data is valuable, everyone's going to lock it in even further. So for example, if you've ever tried to use the X API, the only way left now is to really pay money for it. And then a lot of other apps are trying to like lock them down. So Granola is the popular one these days, and I use it, but they don't have an open API, and I don't think they will for a while. So, I mean, I'll probably try to reverse engineer it. But
what is Granola, by the way?
It's an AI transcription tool, Granola. So super easy to use, really nice. It basically takes meeting notes without you having to join the meeting itself. One of those types of software. So what they're trying to do from their business strategy is say like, hey, everyone's meeting notes are going to live here. Then they can transition to a CRM. And like, I can see how they want to expand their product offering, but as a result, they're going to lock your data in the meantime. So any system that you want context of your meeting notes is now not available to you unless you use a different software. And then that creates its own challenges. So this is kind of the cat and mouse game that is really happening at like ground zero.
What do you think is like the important skill? Like if I wanted to become 7 out of 10 in data engineering, what would you recommend looking into?
Learning APIs, using NAN, understanding how do APIs work, and just using a lot of them yourself, and not like the pre-built configurations of Google Drive that makes it really easy to click. I mean, that's the 1 out of 10 stuff, but if you want to get to 7 out of 10, it's like open up the API docs, look at like, oh, how do I authenticate? How do I get past data? How do I keep track of state? That's kind of the stuff. So for example, like on NAN, they have a Gmail API that makes it really easy to pull messages. Actually, don't use that. Make an HTTP request to get the data itself and see the fields and be like, how do they work together? That's kind of the path you have to go down. And there's not that much, there's actually no data sets of how the outputs of APIs work because they're very specific to the people calling them too. And yeah, it's a bit of a mess around. So there's no great answer here, unfortunately. It's out of like bang your head against the wall and build systems to help you do that less painfully.
I think number one is like just learn how to use APIs, right? Understand how HTTP requests work, and then like play with some APIs and actually make if you're using an NAN or like Zapier, just try to make a webhook and like figure out how that works, right? That seems like to be the first few steps, right?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay. What's the most useful thing you built with AI?
I think my favorite thing so far has been surprisingly actually my calendar app. That's the thing that's live in production that I can use relentlessly. So and this is kind of the rise of personal software, which is so I have a problem that when I travel, booking a meeting becomes very painful because let's say I'm in Sydney right now, which is factually true. And in 2 weeks, I go to New Zealand. So New Zealand isn't too bad, but let's say I was actually going to New York or Europe, some completely different time zone. And sometime tomorrow, I tell someone like, hey, we should get some time to chat. And they, for whatever, open that message next week because they're busy. And they say, oh, let me book a meeting next week on that week. They're not going to book in a time that doesn't make sense for me. Then I have to go back to them and be like, hey, sorry, that time doesn't work. Can you book a different time? And this actually kind of impairs my productivity big time because it just means my ability to get meetings slows down. So I was trying to figure out like, how do I solve this problem? And it led me to a very dark rabbit hole of frustration, but I got there in the end. Which was like, okay, well, let's see what calendar apps are there. So I was already using Calendly. So I looked at, okay, what can I do with Calendly? But Calendly's APIs are very restrictive in what they do and don't allow. So I was like, okay, that doesn't work. Then I looked at cal.com, and it's kind of for like this enterprise book sales type like use case, which wasn't really what I was after. So there's something that was modular enough that would let me do what I wanted to do. So I was like, oh, I'm sure I could build this. So what's the next layer below? So I thought, okay, like maybe there's some pre-built library out there that would help me help with scheduling. And then from the scheduling engine, I can build the front end and all these other bits. And maybe there's some good API out there that lets me pull my event data in free and busy times. So that also didn't happen. So then I kind of like stared down the abyss. I'm like, wow, there is no Lego blocks I can use. So I will have to build this myself. And what ensued was a 1-month journey of like banging my head against like every wall, but kind of like taught me so much about becoming an AI engineer. So quick context, there's ML engineers, which I would say like are more on the like, okay, how do we look at these data sets and turn them into some sort of like engineering grade production system for some business outcome? AI engineering is really understanding like what are the models, what are the tools, and how to use them to get a job done. It's like a blend. It's kind of like, how do I say AI engineering? It's being able to use the best tools in the context of AI. So that's kind of where my journey of becoming an AI engineer started. So the first time
is this kind of like a blockchain engineer versus a smart contract engineer? Is that the
I think that's a good analogy. Okay. I think that's a good one. It's still requires a degree of domain specialty, but it only takes 3 to 6 months because the field is only that new. You can't be like a AI engineer with 2 to 5 years of experience, unless you're maybe playing around with GPT-2, which you're probably already rich. So when I first tried to build this thing, it was actually, I built it incorrectly, and it gave me a glimpse into how not to code with AI and the problem with vibe coding. So my first thing is like, oh, that's like, if none of these components exist, I will just be able to build this myself. So I went to Cursor and I'm like, I want to build a scheduling app that takes into my time zones and has a nice front end and can handle overlaps and all these things. And then like it pumped out a bunch of code and I was like, sick, this is going to be cool. And then the data engineering piece around pulling the events, I couldn't do that in Cursor natively. I did that in NAN. So I got the Google Events API and I just pulled the calendar events in, and I was just looking at the outputs. And then very quickly I realized like, wait, this doesn't make sense. There's still bits that are missing. And this is kind of what I alluded to earlier with the API. So in Google Calendar, you'll have your base events there. But you know, sometimes you can put a multi-day event and then say you're busy. That actually won't return as an event sometimes. It will actually show in the free/busy API, which is different to the events API. So now you have to pull your free and busy times and your events to understand when are you free and when are you busy. And then you have to do that for your personal account and your work account effectively. So that was a 1-week rabbit hole in itself of like, how does the Google Calendar API work? How do I think about like time zones and all this other crazy stuff? And the way that the Google Calendar API works is when you set up a recurring meeting, it's very inconsistent how that will be represented as a data structure. This is kind of like the hurt locker that you start going through, that if you've ever used Notion Calendar or a calendar application, you're used to seeing your events there. But to recreate the state of your calendar by pulling in it via APIs was actually really challenging. So that was a whole rabbit hole. But anyway, I managed to overcome that. Feel free to jump in if you have any questions.
I think like from the outside, it doesn't sound that complex, right? But then like as you break it down, it's like, oh, okay, that's wild. Well, what are the key problems you're trying to solve here? So one is obviously the busy versus free state. The other one maybe is like, I think you mentioned time zone issues, like because you were traveling, so you also got it to cross-reference with your flights. And then I'm guessing you also want to batch meetings as much as possible, so you get deep work.
Correct. Yeah, all of these considerations. So you kind of look at, there's the time zone you're in, there's the time zone you're going to be in, there's the time zone of the other person, there's then your calendar events that are busy, the time zones that whatever it's scheduled with. You're trying to marry all these up, and you actually have to have engineering systems to pull up each one. So whenever you see an AI demo of someone being like, oh, I built like an AI scheduler, I can guarantee you it's not going to work. Also, fun fact, AIs are terrible with dates. Just like they're terrible with math, they're terrible at date operations as well. So they've got better in some instances, but you would never want to use AI to do like, hey, in 3 months from now, book this thing. I think some of them are getting better now with dates, but it's this weird phenomena where Like Cursor sometimes will still tell me, or Windsurf will be like, oh, I found a bug in the API. We got our date that returned in 2025. The year is 2024 right now. And I'm like, no, the year is 2025 right now. What are you on about? So dates and AI are like this very under-discussed rabbit hole. So if you like have in your system, like give me today, what's 3 months from now, and you give that to an LLM, you could get an inconsistent or incorrect error. And if that's wrong even like 5% of the time, it's a nightmare to deal with because your integration just doesn't work or has some weird behavior. So anyway, so I'm going down like a few rabbit holes, but this is kind of like why like doing data engineering work from an external source really sucks. Anyway, I solved that problem. And then I was like, cool, now I need to build a scheduling thing. So I thought like, cool, now I'm just dealing with code. So I spent about 3 weeks vibe coding my way to this like pretty big code base. I was like, cool, it's working, it's getting there. And then on the 4th week, I like probably start to hit like a very serious like trough of depression almost, I swear. It was like every single thing I tried would break. It was the code base. I had no idea how it was built. I just like vibe coded my way through the whole thing. And just like it's when you kind of think about traditional startups and that you can, when the business team wants to move very fast, they can build a mess and deliver those business outcomes. Vibe coding does you the same thing and a lot quicker. So you're like, I just want to build X. And it will be very good at building X in that direction. But the architecture is like completely terrible. So by the time you get to some arbitrary point where you want to extend the code base or add a feature, everything crumbles down massively. And I kind of reached this point like week 3 into this vibe coded project of I like messed up. I need to restart entirely. So I had to throw out all the code and then actually put my engineering hat on and be like, okay, how are we going to build this properly?
So for context, like from a 0 to 10, like what's your code proficiency coming into this?
It's 9.
Okay, so like that's the context I wanted to add, right? Like you know what's going on, but you're vibe coding anyway just to get the speed up, right?
Yeah,
which is a little bit different to me vibe coding because I don't know what the hell's going on, even if the code base is small, right?
I was vibe coding as if I was you. I was like, yeah, like fix it. This doesn't work. Like make it better. Like I was acting like a 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10 engineer, writing no code myself, and it built me into a corner very quickly. So then when I finally had that realization of like, oh shit, vibe coding actually kind of doesn't work in production grade, I then had to sit down and think about it. But here's one thing that I think people underestimate. Even if you vibe code an entire thing incorrectly, you will learn so much about the problem domain space that when you build it the second time, you know all the pitfalls that will happen. So I kind of don't mind vibe coding because it makes me comfortable about the unknowns. And then when I throw all the code out and build it the second time, I'm a lot more elegant in how everything is architected. And that's like the chef's kiss kind of like architecture.
I want to second that, and I can't like impress upon non-technical people who might be listening how scary it is as a manager when your engineering team says that we have to throw this thing out and rebuild it. But for anyone who's had experience doing that, building something the first time takes several weeks or months, let's say. Building it the second time is always an order of magnitude faster. And there's diminishing returns, right? It's maybe, like it gets logarithmically hard as you keep going, and eventually there's just a minimum amount of time that you have to spend building something. And we've talked about this before, Ajay, there's always this like tail end of new bugs that you've introduced or just like little accidents that you make along the way. But that's exactly one of the major powers of vibe coding, is just plowing headfirst into a problem, going really far, really fast. And you have to do it with this intention of rebuilding it on the other side. And the goal is, this is something I talk to my engineering team, especially my R&D team, about a lot, is that it's sometimes the optimal way to solve step 3 really depends on step 1 and step 2, right? But and I think people are fairly comfortable with that. But often the optimal way to solve problem 1 requires you to understand problem 3. And so if you plow through things in a really linear fashion, you're like, I'm going to make my best guess at implementing 1, and that's going to take me 3 weeks. And then I'm going to do my best guess at problem number 2. That's going to take me 3 weeks. And now I can get to problem 3. And I'm like, oh, fuck, I should have really done step 1 totally differently, right? The most important thing is to get end to end, even just a single use case, get it working end to end, because then you discover each of the 3 problems. And then you can say, now it's time to scale this up and make it work properly. I know the challenges that I'm going to be facing later down the line. This is why there's these adages like do things that don't scale, right? Like build your entire startup without any code first, because then you're forced to only get through one use case because you can't really handle anything else without some level of scale and automation. But you get to discover all the little problems along the way. And in business, one of those problems is, does anyone want your freaking product? Right? Don't build the perfect product that no one wants. But yeah, I mean, like that's something that I think only engineers will benefit from. Like people who are already 9 out of 10 coders, because there's nothing about being a good coder that lets you predict the future. And I think this is where a lot of really good coders get hung up. And I like the term architecture because it's actually like, it's the analogy that I always use. It's like, imagine if someone was like, hey, I want a single bedroom home. And you're like, great, fantastic. I am the best fucking designer in the world. I can give you a single bedroom home. And they're like, cool, but now I want a pool. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I think I can cram a pool in here. They're like, great, but now I want a second bedroom and a games room. And you're like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to put them upstairs, even though that maybe doesn't make sense. And then before you know it, you've got this like Weasley house of like 7 stories hanging off each other and nothing's in anywhere that makes sense. And the only option is to destroy the building and build it again, knowing all the things you now know the client actually wants.
And the client
and there's
says,
nothing in that process that like a good designer could have predicted.
yeah,
right?
and the client
Because
then drops that the house is actually built on a hill. So can you please deal with that as well?
yeah, exactly. You do these perfect designs, and then you get to the building site and it's on a fucking hill. Exactly. Yeah.
So let me ask both of you guys, because I'm curious for myself and maybe for other people. Is there still value in me becoming a 6 out of 10 coder today?
Totally. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I think everyone is going to be like forced to become a software engineer in the future, because like the tools and apps out the gate will always fail in terms of what they can offer you, or their legal limitations, their compute limitations, or architectural limitations. So I'm already predicting this. Everyone's going to become a software engineer. And if you don't, you're just going to like be left behind using like Zapier for the rest of your life, while your competition like outbuilds you. So
like a personal attack.
Sorry, like not that way.
But
I have a slightly different take on this though, actually. I don't think everyone's going to be a software engineer, because I think you maybe could have made that argument a little while ago as well. I think that it's still worth doing, because the thing that makes software engineering hard isn't the mechanical part of coding. So the real way that you can tell a junior dev from a senior dev, or like maybe with communities, like you go into an online community, what do their memes look like? Are there memes based on forgetting semicolons and commas? Because if they are, it's a community of junior programmers. Knowing the language is not the hard part, right? Like it's knowing the ideas, and it's the critical thinking. For example, my grasp over the English language is probably the same as like Sam Harris, right? The concept to words part is not the hard part. The reason why he's a revered intellectual and I'm not is because the way he thinks is different, and it's the thoughts that are different. And I think the reason why it's worth becoming at least a partially good programmer is because it's very easy to go from 0 to 1 to be able to express your ideas and realize that your ideas actually aren't what you think they are, right? So it's like why writing is sometimes a good idea, or talking to someone in long form, right? So it's down to that sort of like Bezos mentality of you should write everything out, because everything feels kind of good in your head, but if you can't actually put it into a strong narrative that articulates it for other people, chances are you actually don't have a good idea, right? Or it's only good as an idea, but not good in any practical sense. The ability to code gives you the ability, just another way to express your critical thinking and determine whether you're a good critical thinker. Because most of the time when someone sits down and they get a problem wrong, like a junior or mid-dev, right, the problem isn't that they got the code wrong. The problem is they can't think about the problem in a sensible way.
100%.
And that's really the major thing that like messes people up.
Yeah. And it's like software architecture is this very weird thing where just because it's code, you think like, yeah, it's easy to change it. But as you make these structural decisions, it's honestly like creating a building. And that assumption that everything relies on, you're like, oh, wait, this one assumption makes everything else really hard. I have to re-architect this. It's honestly like building mental skyscrapers. There are these extremely tall skyscrapers. And if you never really built one, you don't actually even know you're building it in the first place. So yeah, fully agree to that though.
So I'm going to take this opportunity. You guys are my AI tutors now. I am currently at a point where, so like, I understand how to use APIs. I can build a static React app or Next.js app pretty easily. And I can interact with an API that's like a simple API, right? If I like want to call some blog posts and display it on my site, I can do that. I don't actually know where to go from here. And like, part of me is just like not moving because I'm like, I don't know where the AI is going to go. So like, should I even learn the skill set? Should I keep going deeper? Where should I put my depth, or where should I put my brain towards to be a little bit more robust as things change?
I have ideas about this, and it kind of loops back to what was mentioned before, which is that AI is notoriously bad at dates, for example, but it's trivial for a human to write an absolutely correct date program, right? And, okay, you should rely on libraries because dates are notoriously fucked up. But the point is, if you can write a little bit of JavaScript, you can easily make a library that says, given this date, what is the date 7 days from now? What is the date today? What is the date a week from now? For some arbitrary input, right? Getting an idea about when things are going to happen relative to today and what today even is. If you then package that up as a tool for your artificial intelligence, the more important thing isn't whether your artificial intelligence can determine what the date is. It's whether your artificial intelligence can determine that that is relevant at all to solving the problem that you've asked it to solve. And if it can do that, which they are actually pretty good at doing, then the date thing becomes irrelevant, right? And so I think where I would go and where I have been going, so I've been building my own virtual assistant in Rust just for shits and giggles and to get used to the Grok API and all these different APIs, is just building little tools like a mathematics tool, like a calculator tool, for example, is one that I built because I know that the AI is bad at math. And a date tool is not one I've got around to, but that's a fair point, right? And when you do this, all you need to do is figure out how do you expose that to your artificial intelligence. And then when you can ask it questions, just like Siri, but how Siri always was meant to be, right? And I think that that's the next step. It's just like work with your AI and see what its limits are and just ask it stuff you actually want to know on a day-to-day basis. And then you get to program these tiny little programs. Because the nice thing about that mental model is that any piece of code that you have to write is very isolated. It's very modular. It's like writing a calculator app, trivial. It's like that's like Bibby's first year of programming. And then writing a calendar app, maybe not as trivial, but it only takes a few months to do, right? It's not like an extensive thing. And more to the point, maybe you could even just avoid all the UI and just have, whatever, pure APIs and things like this. And the more you do this, you just build up a set of tools, then the prompt engineering or the frameworking for your AI means the AI doesn't have to do any of the hard work. It just has to figure out what it is that you want and figure out what tools it thinks it should use to gather that information and then how to put that all together and give it back to you. And that's really all the reasoning frameworks are, right? And what's cool about that is you can go even further and you build these like custom thinking frameworks. So like Ajay, you have a pretty interesting way of like thinking and you approach problems in a different way than other people do. And the reality is like deep search and deep research are just very specific prompts in a very specific order, saying, okay, the users ask you this question, and chances are all it does is have some meta prompt that's like, what are the questions you would need to ask in order to answer Ajay's question? But Ajay, if you know that you are often interested in market research, you have your own style for doing market research. What are the questions that I usually ask, and where do I go to ask them? And then just build that into your AI. Build a bot that does this. And then the AI just says, oh, Ajay's asked me something to do with market research. I'll engage the market research tool that we built. And even that tool may be actual code, or it may be just yet another AI that you've engaged, and you've just got a standard set of questions that you like. And that's how you approach something. I don't know. That's where I would go. Just like automating yourself by like paying attention to the way that you think and just coding that into an AI as a series of questions and reflections.
Yeah. I'd extend that a bit, where it's just like find a problem you're trying to solve and find out, like really be conscious of how you solve it today, then break it down into a series of things and then figure out like what is the smallest possible component I can build and then stack that into a larger component. So like to the calendar app, that's exactly what I did. So rather than building all of it at once, I decoupled the front end, the orchestration API, and the base library, because actually there's no good library for doing operations on time slots effectively. So I built an open source library called Slots that's time zone aware and can do set theory on times effectively. So now scheduling, I was actually in a massage and I figured it out, where it's like there's no library out there that lets you do set, because when you think about scheduling, here's the times I'm free, here's the time someone else is free. And if you simply find the intersect of them, those are the times both of you are available. And then if you have this primitive to do set theory on times that are time slot aware, you actually solve the scheduling problem in a meta way. So I then looked up online. I'm like, who's built a time slot library that in the style of like set theory, and no one had done it. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to build that. So I built that, and now anything that uses like time slots is now forever solved. And like the library I built has like unit tests and all these other things. And the other problem I ran into was natural language date parse.
It's solved until we colonize another planet and all the date standards change.
yeah, please no. Like the other surprising one I found was natural language date parsing. You would think this is a solved problem, but it isn't. So I built a much more...
Oh, wait, there's actually a really interesting reason why this is not solved.
Yeah.
And it actually speaks to the heart of how AIs train themselves, is that everyone uses a different date format and no one contextualizes it. The context is not in the text, right? The context is in metadata that is not readily available most of the time, right? Australians and like Americans switch their dates, but they mostly are compatible, right? Like anything sub 12/12, you can't tell.
Exactly. No, and like, for example, if I say next week and it's on Sunday, do I refer to like the upcoming week or the week after that? So there are all these like interpretations of like, how do you perceive language? So I looked at the best date parsing libraries out there, and there's nothing out there that really did it. Like, for example, if you say end of March, second half of April, the weekend after next, it didn't exist. So I basically built a natural language date parsing library as well. And now any AI apps I build will have access to this because nothing like this existed, unfortunately. So now I've like built these collection of like tools, and like I made them open source. Maybe someone will see them at some point in time. But now like my software stack becomes more and more sophisticated, where if it's like, whether it's NAN or like my calendar scheduling, it's like they have access to these tools. And, you know, there are these mini systems, but you learn how to like stack them like Legos to form huge like skyscrapers.
But it sounds like the natural language date processing doesn't have a solution sometimes, right? Like,
well, yeah, I mean, this is a really important point, right? And this is why vibe coding, and this is where it comes down to critical thinking, right? This idea of like, oh, next week on a Sunday, like that is not an engineering problem. That is a critical thinking problem. That is a cultural awareness problem, right? Or the weekend. In different areas in the world, that means different things, right? Like in some areas of the world, what is it? It's Friday and Saturday is the weekend.
Correct. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just like,
I didn't know that.
or in these stupid places in Europe where the weekend is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You know?
And the week starts on Sunday, actually, not Monday. Like their calendars start on Sunday. So yeah, so that's why the date parser has a configuration where it says, well, when does the week start? What time zone are you in? And I actually built a stack tracer so that they can figure out like how it determined that is the date it derived based on a set of rules. Like it's an overkill for what would be something very simple, but it's a problem I had, and I was surprised no one else had thought of the problem in that way.
The other really interesting thing about things like relative dates is when you're trying to consider that some places have, like, this is just like a weird rabbit hole about how fucked up date times are, right? Different places have like daylight savings. And so if you're talking about like an hour from now could literally be the same time as it is literally right now, depending on when you say that. And depending on who you're saying it to, it's going to be a different time for them, but not for you, right?
Correct.
So time zones shift continuously. And also if you land in exactly the wrong time zone when you say, you know, tomorrow, it may be tomorrow for you, but it's not going to be tomorrow for them. It's still going to be the same day. Because you say, oh, tomorrow morning, that may just be later in the evening for the other person. And so like, if you imagine this exchange is happening over email, and you've got these like stupid AIs that Google and Apple have built into their fucking email clients that's try to put stuff on your calendar. It has no idea who's emailed me. It has no idea what time zone they're in, and it shouldn't probably know. And I don't want it to have magical access to where that person is in the world. So yeah, I mean, like there are these fundamental limitations, and you do see examples of people vibe coding their way into strange corners simply because they don't think about the nature of the problem. And what I find really funny is that occasionally you see these people rediscover programming languages where they're like, what do we need is like a really specific, unambiguous way to talk to these AIs and tell them exactly what we need. You know, it's just like, yeah, you do. It's called a programming language. Go learn it.
100%. And that's why whenever people are like, oh, I built like a scheduler, I'm like, okay, like what does a scheduler know? How good is it? What's its time zone support? Because like, oh, AI with time zones, it's 100% going to fuck up because, yeah.
I think you're probably in the top 50 people in the world in terms of how intensely you've thought about scheduling and date times. Like,
no, I guarantee you, any senior engineer, talk to them about date times, and they'll tell you to fuck off.
I I was so close to like just losing mental composure by the time I finished building this library, but like it's built and I'm happy. And I learned so much about like time zones in the process, like to a degree that I'm uncomfortable sharing about now.
Scheduling seemed like a 1 out of 10, like in terms of how simple it is before I had this conversation. And I'm like, holy shit, it's actually way more complicated than I thought it was.
And this is what I think is going to happen. So here's my like hot take. AI is going to reach the same state that crypto's in right now. So in crypto, it's like all these layer ones and everyone's like, oh, like come to our chain and build. And everyone in the AI race is going to say, hey, what do you want to build today on my tool? But actually the number of people who have something genuine worth building is actually very tiny. And everyone's going to continue to build tools that help you build what you want to build, but no one actually knows what to build. And
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, it's going to happen. Just, yeah.
You're so right, actually. Now that I think about it, I've done so many of these like workshops with founders, and there'll be like 50 or 60 each time. And then they all email me with the ideas that they have. And like 90% is not good. Like it's just, and like, I think about it, I'm like, okay, well, if 90% of people just have bad ideas or don't have anything interesting to build, then like, oh yeah, there'll always be an edge for people with ideas on what to build. So
this is also, this touches very tangentially on why APIs are very bad often. And the reason for it is that if you work at a company, right? Like, whatever, you're a cool new startup and you're building an API for other people. When are you going to use that API? Basically never. Because if you want a feature in your product, you build it into the product. You're the producer of the API, not the consumer, right? And you have to get pretty big before, as a company, it's worth building external products on top of your product. And so the people building the API and exposing it are a completely separate class of people from the ones consuming it who have the ideas of how to use it. And yeah, it always astounds me how often people just like build tools and like, I'm going to build a database. It's like, cool. Have you ever built an app that uses a database? If so, how many? And under what circumstances? Like, have you want to build an AI tool? Have you built a product on top of an AI? Because if you haven't, the odds that you're going to build a tool that are actually useful are basically zero. This is why the original versions of LangChain were trash. And honestly, LangChain doesn't need to exist. Like, part of the reason why I built this virtual assistant is because I was looking at all these like prompting agent libraries and I was like, the fuck do any of these exist? It's just basic glue code between prompts. The hard part is writing the prompt. And honestly, it's also the boring part because as an engineer, you're sitting there writing English, just like, it's kind of lame. But
dude, what happened to LangChain? I feel like I haven't heard from them in a while. Like it was all the rage for like maybe a month.
None of those developers built any products. Show me a product that any of those developers built on top of AI before they built LangChain. Right.
And the other bit I'm seeing is like so you just think because someone's doing engineering, it's hard, but there's actually a set of problems that are actually hard engineering problems. And when you look behind the curtain, almost no one's willing to solve actual hard engineering problems. Everyone's willing to solve like the easy engineering problems that kind of give you the most showcase. And the AI world is notorious for this. Like people are like, what was it? Manus that came out a few weeks ago. And people were like, oh my God, this is game changing, blah, blah, blah. Is really just like Claude Sonnet 3.5 with 21 tools attached to it. And it's like, we built something. Like that's not actually value adding in the way that like you hope it would be. So like it's a very thin layer of value is what I kind of like sense the more I use these tools and the deeper down I go down the rabbit hole. And like there's it's actually really disappointing because if you kind of think about these as towers, right? Like these like layers you're building and you're trying to have some use case that rests on all these layers, the more valuable the use case, the more pressure it puts. And if your abstraction you're working with isn't really solid, it just crumbles. And you have to keep going down the abstraction layers until you find the most solid layer. And usually that's like kind of Unix, C programming languages that started like held the test of time. And you're like,
if you're really unlucky, like a real-time system without an operating system.
Yeah.
I think the other unique thing about LLMs that make LLM-driven products really hard, and this is, I guess, coming from my experience building one, is that the better it is, the worse it is for users. The better it is at what it does, the more users will push it to do things. So one thing that I've noticed is users will come and you look at the history of people's chats. They'll ask it one question. They'll be like, tell me about this thing. and they'll get a good answer. You're like, okay, tell me about this other thing. They'll get a good answer. They'll come back next week. They'll be like, and in a single message, they'll be like, tell me about A, B, C, D, and X, and also how they all relate to each other. And then they'll ask like 6 questions and meta questions all at once. And you're like, you look at this as an engineer and you're like, there's no way this LLM had any chance of solving this. And so there's this almost educational aspect where maybe in the 2000s through probably even till today, there's a group of people that understand how to write a Google query, and there's a group of people who don't. And you kind of can't cater to the latter because they're doomed. So like, I don't know. It's this weird problem. Like you watch people. I used to watch, people sit down at Google and they'd be like, "Oh, can you tell me what the weather will be like tomorrow where I am?" You're like, what is that? Whereas other people would just be like, "Weather now," right? And the people who type "weather now" have learnt something somehow about how to interact with the system that the other people didn't. The problem is that AI is making those other people, like, it's allowing them to exist and hold space and interact with your product. And I don't know, you get all these like really weird degenerate like users that would usually drop off and would just be bad users, and you would just say those people aren't for us. Their IQ is not high enough.
Dude, that's so true. As someone who's looked at maybe like 100,000 Google search queries as a marketer, like, holy shit. The stuff that people search and like the level of vocabulary that they use is insanely bad sometimes. And then you look at this keyword and be like, how is there 2,000 people searching it this exact way? So, yeah, you're so right.
But, and I think like that is so far my biggest tell between someone who has actually spent the time trying to get things done with an AI. So again, before you build something with an AI, just try and use it. Then build something with it, and then go and build tools for building things with it. But like the biggest tell is whether or not they ask they ask the AI to do one thing, and then they drill instead of asking the AI to do all the drilling for them.
Exactly. Well, you see, that's kind of like the pattern. If you give it a bunch of text and you say like, drill for me, it has to know which direction every layer of the problem to drill. And that's like actually the bit it's not good at, because it kind of just gives you garbage. So yeah, and to that point, it's like all these people who now think the biggest risk of AI is people thinking it's actually smart when it isn't smart. And it now like empowers this whole class of people like, oh, this thing can do anything. Therefore, I'm not going to work because AGI is going to take over in 3 years from now. And you're like, wow, you've now self-selected yourself out of being competitive because you think this thing that is smart isn't smart and is going to take your, like, some cases.
So I've got a hard stop like a minute ago. So it's obviously not that hard. But here's my thing is like, everyone on LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever, they have an incentive to say, oh, this new AI is a game changer, because that's what draws attention. There probably is space for 3 slightly stupid people like us to come in and be like, actually, no, this is why every one of these innovations isn't actually going to change the world and doesn't actually push the needle. And you still have to know how to think. And you can't outsource your thinking. You can't outsource your taste. I think, AJ, over the next 3 years, people are going to realize that being smart and having good style are actually kind of the same thing.
Interesting. Any final words or thoughts, Kerman?
But you guys please carry on without me though. Don't feel the need to wrap up.
Do you have a hard stop, Kerman?
No, I can chat for a bit more.
Okay. I had one more question, which is like, what are some other red pills you have about AI? When I say red pills, like something people like, everyone believes X, but actually you believe Y.
Yeah. So a lot of companies' moats are going to get destroyed in ways that they weren't actually predictable. So one of the hottest ones is I think cloud computing is going to be in for a very interesting time. So it goes down to like abstraction layers. AI is really good at things that have been done before plenty of times throughout human history, and history defined as like n number of years, let's say. I don't think months is really a time scale, but years. So when you think about like these computing systems you're trying to build, whether it's an app, an AI, whatever, they're like built on these layers. And typically in engineering, you don't go the layer below because it's always a bit scary and it takes time to learn that layer. But you have to remember, if it's an abstraction, it's very well known and well understood, especially by the LLMs. So what it lets you do is actually build very vertically integrated companies where you can remove parts of the stack effortlessly, because you can be like, oh, I'm not scared of learning that abstraction layer below. I can just do it myself. So when people are like, oh, like AI is going to replace SaaS apps, I don't think that's the right framing. It's more so going to be AI is going to empower people to look underneath the hood and build more of the building from start to finish than kind of relying on these Jenga pieces. And the effects of that are still not actually understood that much. So that's like one. The second is that, like, okay.
Wait, hang on, just to focus on the first one. Like, when you say you don't think SaaS is going to be disrupted, because I think that SaaS is just going to go away. Like, why would you pay for Slack, or why would you pay for Xero if you could just like make the entire thing with AI at some point? Are you saying that's not true, or will it look different?
Correct. No, that's not true. So okay, you want to build Slack. Okay, well, you need your UI, then your database. Then you're like, oh, but like I want it to be real time because real time is really nice. Then I want to add reactions. And then I want a mobile app. And then I also want an Android app. And then I want to make sure I can get those like cool little GIFs as well, because like those are really cool. And suddenly like each component is actually not straightforward. And suddenly like, wait, this is taking a lot of time. Maybe it's cheaper if I spend $15 a month to do it. It's like people is like software isn't you build it and it's done. It requires maintenance and a lot of maintenance, and especially as you want to add new things. So SaaS isn't going to be disrupted in the way people think it is. Like that's just people who've never built products now realizing they can build something.
But perhaps the ones that will, I think that like low hanging fruit that will disappear is like a HTML to image API that you're using and paying $9 a month for, which is what I do. Right? So like, why would I pay for that if I can just like spin it up really quickly?
No, but the reason why you're going to use it still is because they've seen how 1,000 or 1,000,000 different users use this thing and have encountered 1,000 different edge cases. And as you build your own, you're going to run into the same edge cases and then learn everything the creators learn. But now you're spending your time to do what they've done.
Fair. And to your point, I'm still paying the $9 a month. I haven't actually bought it to try and build this thing. So it's just cheaper to me from a cost perspective, from a time cost perspective. So,
for sure.
Okay, fair point. What was the second thing you wanted to say?
The returns on, rather than telling an AI to do what you're trying to get it to do, like for example, like parse dates, be a natural language date parser. Instead, you can use the AI to build a tool that builds the thing you're trying to get done. And like, not trying to say like, how do I get the AI to do X? Saying, how do I get the AI to build X to do Y? And that way of thinking is still very underappreciated by people. And that's what you should be focusing on more, less than how do I get it to do Y directly, because it can't do Y.
That makes sense. I think I've been thinking very directly, like treating AI like an API and be like, hey, I'm going to give you this and then give me back this, as opposed to like, can I create an API using AI and then like, do that stuff. So it makes sense.
Exactly.
Interesting. Cool. Any final words you want to leave with the audience?
This is probably one of the most exciting times to be alive, and the doomerism isn't helpful. Stop thinking of it that way. The power that one individual have is now unprecedented. Capital is less important than you think it is. And the only limitation for you to achieving your dreams and getting to where you want to go is your thinking patterns and the values that you hold and the way you live your life. Basically, there's now a financial cost to values, and basically curiosity has been repriced tenfold. So the more curious, diligent, kind, hardworking you are, the more money you'll make naturally just by expressing those values through these tools.
That's awesome. That's so good. There's like no point being negative anyway, right? Like you can, even if it becomes negative in the future, being negative now, it's like worrying about something that's going to happen. There's no point. Just like be blissfully ignorant in that case and like be happy. And then if it all goes to shit, it goes to shit.
Exactly.
All right, man. Thanks so much for coming on. This is so much fun.
No worries.